and welcome to Conversations from the World of Allergy, a podcast produced by the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. I'm your host, Dave Stukas. I'm a board-certified allergist and immunologist and serve as a social media medical editor for the Academy. Our podcast series will use different formats to interview thought leaders from the world of allergy and immunology. This podcast is not intended to provide any individual medical advice to our listeners. We do hope that our conversations provide evidence-based information. Any questions pertaining to one's own health should always be discussed with their personal physician. The Find an Allergist search engine on the Academy website is a useful tool to locate a listing of board-certified allergists in your area. Finally, use of this audio program is subject to the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology Terms of Use Agreement, which you can find at www.faaai.org. Today's edition of our Conversations from the World of Allergy podcast series is from our Ask the Expert category, and is mostly targeted towards allergists and physicians, but I hope that this will be an enlightening conversation for anybody who wishes to listen. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Zuhair Ballas, who is the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. Dr. Ballas is a professor of internal medicine at the University of Iowa, Carver College of Medicine. Dr. Ballas has a long and accomplished career as a researcher, clinician, and educator. His research focus has centered on studying the role of natural killer cells in health and disease. Today, Dr. Ballas is going to discuss the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, which has the highest impact factor among all allergy journals. Dr. Ballas, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the journal, and I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, excellent. Well, I think, to begin with, it's important for our listeners to really understand how impactful the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology is for our specialty. Can you comment on the current impact factor and help us understand what that actually means?
Okay, so the impact factor actually is one measure of how much a particular journal contributes to the literature at large and to the specialty in particular. So for JACI, and I'm going to refer to the journal as JACI because, it's kind of like a family. And for JACI, we are actually the highest impact factor among all allergy journals. I think we are number 6 among all immunology journals, which I think is an accomplishment as well. And so the way the impact factor is calculated is really to see how many of our papers are cited and how often. In other words, the idea is that the more citation a particular journal gets for all of its papers, that means people are actually taking notice, they're reading what we're publishing, and hopefully that's impacting their research, which in turn will impact the specialty. So generally, and as you know, it's human nature that you want to publish in the journal that will have the widest exposure for your research. So it kind of feeds on itself. The higher your impact factor, the more the authors are likely to submit to the journal, and which makes also kind of the more papers what we cannot accept, unfortunately. So maintaining the impact factor, in essence, is like maintaining our reputation among the scientific community. Now, the way the impact factor is calculated is calculated over a 2-year period. So the impact factor that's released in 2019 is calculated for the papers that were published in 2016 and 2017, because you want to give a year at least for the papers to have adequate exposure. And so over that 2-year period, Clarivate, which is which are the people who actually calculate the impact factor, calculate the number of the papers that we published. That's the denominator. And the number of citations we got, that would be the numerator. So the higher the numerator, obviously, the higher the impact factor. And the lower the denominator, also the higher impact factor. This is actually what Clarivate tells us that their formula is. Sometimes people say that they have other considerations that we don't know about. But from our point of view, really, it is a measure of how valued JACI is to our authors, to our site, to the people who read us as well. But that doesn't really impact. It doesn't measure how are we impacting the members of the academy, who actually are the ones who read us, but not necessarily writing papers. So this is where the challenges for JACI comes in, because we want to be targeting the scientific community that's going to submit to us and can cite us, but we cannot forget why we're here, which is actually our members and our readers. So we really have to have material that will impact the practice of our members as well. So it's a daily consideration actually that to balance the two tracks, if you will. I hope that was clear enough.
Oh, yes. No, absolutely. I think that was one of the best explanations that I've heard, and I think it's helpful for everybody listening to really understand what that means. And I like, to kind of segue from what you just mentioned because you're right. You're trying to reach a very broad audience of researchers and immunologists and practicing allergists. So along those lines, can you describe for us the different types of articles that are published in JACI?
Okay, so there are different formats, and obviously there, are, as you mentioned, we have different content as well because this is the nature of the specialty. Because with allergy and clinical immunology, so we have papers that are I hate to use the word pure allergy, but are mostly allergic diseases. We have papers that are clinical immunology, but we also have papers that are basic immunology. So we have multiple formats. First, we have editorials, obviously, and I'll expand on that later. We have reviews. Each issue has a theme, and for each theme, we usually like to have a clinical review, a review that kind of summarizes the developments in that particular area up until now. We have, and that actually appeals a lot more to our practitioners. And for that one, actually, we also offer CME exam questions so that readers can actually obtain CME for reading that particular review. Then we have another review which focuses more on immunopathogenesis and mechanisms. And then we usually have a rostrum whereby, something controversial, we offer people the opportunity to pontificate, if you will. And we also have a current perspective that is a summary of a particular aspect of the theme for that issue. So these are all invited, obviously, and the editorials are invited as well. So then we have the original articles, which are full-length articles that are submitted by the authors and are subjected to peer review. We have letters to the editor, which are usually condensed format. They are limited in the number of words and also in the number of figures or tables that you can have and the number of references. Because these are supposed to kind of address kind of new developments that may not be ready for prime time or kind of a novel concept that the observation is important but it has not been fleshed out yet. So in other words, kind of give people in the field the heads up that hey, we've just watched this, so maybe everybody can start working on this so we can actually bring this to fruition. So these are the basics in. So when I took over as editor in chief, we started out some initiatives and kind of expanded our formats. And the idea was being to really get the basic science, but also have a format whereby we can actually also explain why is that basic science development important and now how it's going to impact the practitioner actually, if not immediately, then in the near future. And so we instituted several new formats, and I'm going to try to remember if we figure I can remember them all because so we instituted something called paradigms and perspectives, which is actually kind of takes some area that is not very clear in the literature, or there's some area that there have been some kind of developments in the basic field, and try to explain it as to why that is important and how that may impact the practice in the future. We also I believe that most of the readers, especially the younger people, are becoming more and more visually oriented. So we now we give the option to the authors of having graphical abstracts for their original papers, so that they can summarize the particular paper, the particular methods and results in a visual format, so that you can get it at a glance, at a glimpse. Because everybody is busy, and sometimes if people glance the graphical abstract, they can decide if they want to read it or not, or they're going to decide if it's going to impact them or not. So hopefully that will work. And actually, it is. I'm very pleased that when I go to meetings now, it is not unusual for somebody to be flashing some of our graphical abstracts. So it's kind of nice to see. We actually emphasize even our editorials. We kind of now I ask the authors to include some display items in the editorials, like a graph or a table, so that people can also get the idea at a glance. We also introduced an occasional series called Methods in Allergy Immunology, and that is to kind of to explain how certain things are examined, and not only for research, but really kind of like how do you do flow cytometry? How what does it mean when you measure an IgE? And stuff like that, or how is the method done, and what are the caveats in interpreting that method? Because just because you have a method, a result, unless you know how the method is done, you're not going to be able to troubleshoot it. We also introduced a series called Fundamentals of Allergy Immunology, which is supposed to follow the format of the allergy board over a few year period to cover all aspects. So, for example, we've covered mast cells, neutrophils, eosinophils, and we're gonna be going on down the road on that. Also, we're gonna be kind of be covering some of the immunology aspects as well. We also introduced an occasional series on mentoring. So far we've had Frank Austin and Dee Metcalf, and we have an editorial, a paper on mentoring by Dr. Becky Buckley in the works as well. We also introduced, I think I managed already put on the perspectives. We introduced something called Beyond the Frontiers, because there's a lot of things happening in science which may not be directly related to us now, but may actually become important. For example, machine learning, like wearable technology, biosensors. We've already published some on that. And again, the idea, as you can tell probably from the theme, is to cover all aspects of the specialty, not only allergy immunology, but what's happening in medicine at large, because all of that is going to impact us in the future, we think. Another thing we introduce is workshop summaries, and that people, when they have meetings in international meetings that where some important new research has been discovered, we're asking somebody in there to kind of write us a summary, so as people can actually know what's going on without having to travel to those meetings. Also, one of our missions is actually to foster the development of our young people. So we have introduced a regular feature for young faculty awardees that were awarded by the foundation, what the research is, so that so people can actually hopefully help them along, come along, because we definitely have to care for the future of the specialty. I think I covered most of everything. I may have forgotten some of that, this other stuff that we've done, but I will remember if as we go along.
Sure. That's amazing, and that's a wonderful overview and really robust offerings. I think that as you talked about it, you're trying to reach a wide audience, so that's fantastic. I'd like to follow up on the theme concept. So as you mentioned, you solicit some invitations for people to provide rostrums and editorials and things like that. How far in advance do you have to decide on a theme for an issue?
At least a year in advance, and
Oh,
sometimes that may be a little bit too short of a time frame, because we're gonna have to figure out. It's actually a little bit tricky, because you have to figure out what's happening, what's important, what we haven't covered, which area has some new developments that we need to cover. But also, you want to get your authors enough time to kind of write it, and then we can review them, because we review all reviews, not only original articles and letters that we review. We also review reviews, make sure that we are not biased or anything like that. So we, at least a year in advance, we decide on the theme. Occasionally, something new develops that we try to kind of rush if we could, and then but usually we can try to cover that either by an editorial or a paradigm perspective. Like for example, we're trying to cover some of the new deaths from the vaping, because vitamin E was involved, and we have been publishing a few papers on the role of vitamin E in allergy. So trying to say, in particular in respiratory disease. So this we're trying to do that really quick. So we're going to do probably an editorial on it. We have to be prepared ahead of time, but we also have to be able to kind of do a rapid response, if you will.
sure. Yeah, and I think that that perspective is very helpful, and hopefully for our listeners, next time they open up one of the journals and look at some of the articles, that they have that appreciation for how much work behind the scenes goes into each article and each issue. So that's fantastic. Now, I love that you highlighted some of the recent changes. But what I'd like to talk about or ask your thoughts on, I'm impressed how JACI really tries to reach readers beyond its pages. You mentioned the graphical abstracts, but you also utilize things such as videos and social media. Can you describe how you're employing some of these channels and the type of engagement that you're seeing?
Yes, so we as we talked already about the graphical abstracts. We actually we are on definitely have a good presence on the social media for every issue. All our original articles and reviews, we have Facebook summaries, and they will have a tweet. And so we release a tweet a day usually to kind of cover what we've done. I also pick some of our letters to the editor that we think are kind of have people should know about. We also do a tweet and a tweet on some of those. So for almost pretty much any article that we have for every month, we have a Facebook and a tweet or just a tweet. And so we release the tweets one tweet a day. So that's our social media presence. We actually kind of we've tried several things. We tried to have a social media editor. That didn't work out. We figured that kind of we were doing a better job just doing it in house. We so we did video abstracts, and we haven't done much of those mainly because it has a lot of work to produce a video abstract. It's a lot easier to do a graphical abstract, but still, every now and then, some of our authors want to do the video abstract, so we work with them on that. So that we've done that. We tried something called virtual microscope, but whereby you can actually we can have the author submit a particular histology slide so that you can actually can go and look at it as though you're looking at it under a microscope in a pathology lab. But we did not have many takers with that, so it can turn out to be a little bit too technologically challenging. So we kind of we do this now on only on upon request. But the graphical abstracts have been extremely popular with our authors, and I think around 50% of our papers currently have a graphical abstract.
Well, that's great. And it really, I think, speaks to the outside the box thinking that is employed with the journal and your staff and yourself as well. And I'd like to go back to you. When you first assumed the role as co-editor in chief of JACI in 2016, and as of 2018, you're now the editor in chief. And one of your first endeavors was to conduct a needs assessment survey of JACI readers and Academy members. Can you discuss some of the themes that emerged from this assessment and what you learned?
Yeah, so we've done actually. Dr. Chesme Akdis and I started for January in 2016, but we actually did a membership survey in 2015, and then we did another membership survey last fall in 2018. And it was interesting to see, as you know, whenever you do a survey, you're looking at demographics. And it was kind of nice to see that our audience actually is global, is worldwide, really, and that was extremely important us to try to make sure that we extend our global outreach. And I'll tell you later how we did some of our endeavors. We certainly that's a work in progress still, and we asked our members as to what do they like and don't like from the current format. And it was obvious that they really liked the reviews for sure. Everybody liked that. That was very high score. And they asked for a little bit more of what I told you about, some kind of more explanation of what does these developments mean. And that's actually how some of those initiatives came from. But for the most part, we asked them also before we adopted graphical abstract. We asked this is the one in 2015. Would you be interested in a visual format? And that was a resounding yes.
Mm.
And we asked them if they like the theme of each journal, of each issue, should we keep that or should we kind of morph it? They said no, keep it, so we kept it. So what is really kind of nice is that when we followed up with the survey in 2018, and we got almost every question we asked about the content and the format, we had 70 to 80% of outstanding to very good. So we can I think we're reaching out our members. And actually one statistic that I'm very very happy with is that we keep track of the number of downloads that, and as you know, the downloads are pretty much global, and also it kind of means some people who are not necessarily authors or readers, or who are probably readers, will go into the website and then download some of our papers. And in the last 2 years, we went up. I don't have the statistic exactly in front of me, but we went up from like 800 to 900,000 downloads a year. We are like now close to 4 to 5 million downloads a year. So I think our readers are happy with what we're publishing. So that's actually one statistic that I'm very very proud of. That our dual mission hopefully is working.
That's great. And I like the tracking of downloads because, as we've all evolved in the way that we, get our information, and a lot of people, like you said, just go right to the website to get the articles. That's wonderful. Now, from what you've described so far, it's clear to me that Jackie is really committed to evolving to meet the future needs of our specialty. And in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges facing our specialty of allergy and immunology, both now and over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's an excellent question, actually, and there's no one single answer for that. So, as you may know, that around this 5 6 years ago, the academy had a task force on the future of allergy. I was part of that, and I think Dr. Bill Bussey was the lead person on that. And we wrote an editorial in JACI at the time. The consensus was that what we're looking for, a couple of things, is that the scope of the specialty is definitely going to expand. And part of the reason, I think, and actually I talked to some of our fellows who go and practice, and that is most of the easy allergy immunology diseases are being handled by the primary care provider, mainly because we have such good therapeutic armamentarium now. They don't have to come to the allergist initially. And so I think it's evolving such that first, for traditional allergic diseases, I think it is the allergist is seeing some of the more and most complicated patients as compared to what was the case 20 years ago. But also from the scope of the specialty, I think we are expanding. First, part of it is because of the really the expansion of the therapeutic approaches. So, like for food allergy, and of course, your oral immunotherapy is a major development which can have a lot of its own issues. But more importantly, the development of biologics. So with biologics, and I feel strongly about that because Jackie is taking a claim on biologics, all biologics, and and so the reason I'm interested in biologics, one is, as you know, biologics have become extremely important in allergy immunology, starting with the dawn of omalizumab. Obviously, we can kind of pinpoint when that started in allergy with the first publication of omalizumab, which was around 2000, 2001, I think. And since then, obviously, we've had tons of biologics that have come down the pike. But a lot of other specialties also have biologics. Now, the thing with biologics is that they don't always behave like they are supposed to, because depending on the individual biological study state, you get a lot of unanticipated consequences. And I go around actually talking about some of the unanticipated consequences that we've dealt with in my institution. So I think knowing how to use the biologics for allergic immunological diseases is important, but also knowing how to kind of handle some of the reactions, the unanticipated complications of the biologic. And I'm not talking just allergic reactions, okay? I'm talking some unanticipated immunological reactions. I'll give you an example, which is not necessarily applied directly to us, but at least to give you an example why we don't always understand, is that when the TNF antagonists first came out for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, they're great. They work in rheumatoid arthritis, terrific. But nobody anticipated that they're gonna activate TB. And actually, that was, I mean, the immunologists learned from that side effect because it was known from mouse models that you needed interferon and TNF alpha to kind of form a granuloma, but nobody was thinking as what do you need to maintain a granuloma. It turned out that maintaining a granuloma is actually an active process. And so we get a lot of consults of patients who are on biologics, say for oncology, for some of the other diseases, ophthalmology, that they end up coming in with unusual immune manifestations that we really, I think that we're gonna have to deal with that. One, two is a lot of the medical dermatological diseases. I think gonna become more on the part of our the scope of our specialty, because mainly because a lot of them are two things. One, the immune base is being understood more, and so they need more someone immunologist to understand what's going on. And also, biologics for dermatology are probably the largest growing area of biological research right now. I think there are at least 70 biological clinical trials going on for dermatological diseases. And we're actually planning a theme issue on the immunology of skin diseases, hopefully in a year or so. So it's kind of, so it gives you an idea. The other thing is that when we're looking at, stop me if I'm talking too much. I'm passionate
No,
about this.
yeah, your passion is evident, and I love it. It's great.
So certain things, I mean, as you know, allergy in general, we've had a lot of contested areas. We had some kind of rocky relationship with some of the ENT people, some of the dermatological people. But I think there are certain areas that certainly are going to be our domain. We have to really take possession of those. We got the ones that we don't have any contest on are food allergy for sure, drug allergy for sure, immunodeficiency for sure, and I would like to add on that immunological complication or biological diseases. I think at the very least that is where I think the scope of the specialty is going. Now, obviously, the flip side of that, of course, you got all the kind of the health care issues and the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement and so on. We haven't addressed that in JACI yet, but we kind of be trying to kind of try see if how we can try to do that. But we're addressing more of the of clinical and basic aspects that we think for the scope of the specialty.
You know,
I
I
think
think
that was a long-winded answer to you. I'm sorry if I if I went too long.
no, it's great. And I agree with you. We have these shiny new toys with our biologic treatment options, but the unintended consequences and long-term monitoring and use and implementation really needs to be better understood as we move forward. So that's fantastic. Now, I'd like to, a little personal if that's okay. You seem like a passionate sort of person. So, as editor in chief of JACI, it must keep you very busy. I think our listeners would really like to understand more about what your position entails, and I'd be interested to learn what you enjoy most about your role.
Okay, well, the most enjoyable part is the submissions, the original submissions, because you know what you actually get to have your pulse on what's going on long before anybody else does, and it's kind of gives you actually changes your perspective on what how you teach and actually how you see how you deal with the patients a little bit, because you know what people are thinking, what they're finding, what they're not finding. That is the most fun part of the job. Now, also, that's the most time-consuming part of the job. So, I mean, it's kind of because I mean, you know, I actually read every submissions. I mean, every morning I go through submissions, and
Wow.
and then and as you know, we can't send every submission for review. I have to decide which ones are more likely to be accepted. So I don't want to waste the time of our reviewers either. So I select some of them. And we obviously consult with the deputy editors and the associate editors. Obviously, I cannot survive without their help. And so then we decide if we're going to send that out for review, and I assign that to either one of the deputy editors or one of the associate editors, and then they send it out for review. And then when the reviews come back, the associate editors give a recommendation, and I review all the recommendations actually before finalizing the decision. Because sometimes, as I said, because I kind of know everything that is in the works. Because sometimes we get a paper that will be complementary to a paper we have accepted already, but it's not really published yet. And so kind of try to kind of make sure that if it disagrees, will be great. If it agrees, will also be great, depending on the situation. And so we kind of try to kind of tweak that so that to kind of be fair to the topic, but also more fair to our authors as well. Then of course we have regular phone calls to decide what we're gonna do as far as content concerned. As I mentioned, we can talk about the themes a year in advance, whom we're gonna invite, and what kind of topics we're gonna cover. And then I'm actually involved in every step of the production of the paper, even including the cover design. and whom we're going to ask for editorials. And also then I actually respond to all our authors who actually want to submit. They have a pre-submission inquiry, and I also respond to the authors who are really angry and mad at me because I did not accept the paper. So that actually is the toughest, because that is really the toughest part of the job, because I have to turn down some really good papers, but it's just that we can't publish everything.
Mm.
It's kind of, you have to be selective. I think I gave you a kind of a synopsis of what goes. So, I mean, suffice it to say, it takes me pretty much most of the mornings, pretty much 4 or 5 hours every morning at least. And but as I said, it's kind of, it's a labor of love, really.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of many of my colleagues who are listening, I struggle with staying current with the manuscripts that are published in the journal. And you mentioned that you're reading every single submission. Do you have any tips on time management skills for the rest of us? How do you sort of budget that amount of time throughout your day?
Well, actually, it's kind of, I find that the one tip I'll tell people is that you can control the beginning of the day. So try to get as much done as possible at the beginning of the day, because as you know, as the day goes on, you lose control. You have no idea what's going to happen. So I kind of start out pretty much early, long before anybody has come in here. So kind of get things going.
I think that's great advice. Do you mind cluing us in on what early is for you, or what time do you normally show up?
Probably in the office by 6 a.m.
Okay. So it's an early start. Early bird gets the
It's an
worm.
early start. They gather a couple hours before the phone starts ringing.
Okay. Well, that's great advice that hopefully all of us can employ as well. So there you have it, everybody. Wake up early and read those first articles before your day gets going. Well, let's shift the conversation a little bit towards the overall process of peer review and manuscript submissions. You sort of touched upon this a little bit, but for our listeners, what resources are available for authors who are interested in submitting their work for publication in JACI? Where can you direct them?
Well, go to our website. We actually have detailed instructions for authors. There's a button. We just actually been working hard on revamping our website, and I ask people to go back and look at the website, because we just finished making major changes in the website a couple of weeks ago. We're not done yet, and so that it makes it, there is it's real easy to see where you want to submit a manuscript. And then there's author information, and we actually explain the various formats that are available. And if you read all those instructions, we keep tweaking them to make sure that they are as clear as possible. And so that is a very, very, I would recommend that the first thing you do when you want to submit something, go and read that. So author guide, and then also some Elsevier author information pages that you can click on. And if you have anything that's not clear yet, just contact the editorial office, and they'll be glad to answer your questions. I ask people that if they have something they're not quite sure about, they can submit a pre-submission inquiry, and we usually respond within a couple of days as to whether that we're interested in, not interested in. But the big thing really is read the author instructions, because they're as detailed as possible. And if something not clear, then just ask. We just send to. We have a link to say ask for JACI. You can go in there. And I kind of important thing to make sure that you figure out the format, the limitation of the format. For example, for letters to editor, it's 1,000 word limit. For original articles, we don't have word limit, so that's important to know. For letter to editor, we have limits on references. We don't have limits on references for original articles, but that's all spelled out. We have even instructions on how to do a graphical abstract with examples. A big thing to kind of really important is make sure you fill the conflict of interest, because obviously we actually look at that. We scrutinize that. We actually scrutinize that to make sure that we have no conflict of interest, and we have to have a conflict of interest declaration from all the authors. Sometimes that holds things up a little bit.
Mm. So aside from the conflict of interest information and the word count based upon the type of submission, are there other common mistakes that can be avoided up front to help assist the peer review process?
Most common mistakes really are people don't follow the format that
Mm.
we're recommending. Those are pretty much the most common ones. and it is important that you are clear. We actually we do not insist on any format for the abstract because we kind of free flowing abstract we accept. But if you make the abstract as understandable as possible, because as you know, most people, especially when we invite reviewers, they're gonna read the abstract to decide whether they're gonna accept to review that or not. So it's very important to you to make your abstract as true to the data as possible, because sometimes people kind of mention what the method is, and then the conclusion is like pretty much like doesn't is incongruous with what they were looking for. So this is a common mistake, and that's important for when I read it, but also when we send it to reviewers, because reviewers, when they look at the abstract, they're going to decide whether they're interested in doing that or not. So you got two layers that you're going to have to actually pass muster. That pretty much is the most common error we have: not following the format, not following the word limit, and not being clear. And also, really, I mean, if you have difficulty with English, we get a lot of problem with English. Sometimes it's kind of get somebody to help with the English, and I assume that's not so much for people from North America. But as I mentioned, we do have global submissions, and we get submissions from people whose English is not the first language, and sometimes we have a little bit of problem with that.
No, it's impossible for any journal to publish every single submission, just due to space constraints and the appropriate nature for the journal and scope of mission and things like that. Are you able to give us a sense of how many original article submissions you received in 2018 per se, and how many were ultimately published, or at least a percentage of overall submissions that get published?
So I think we in 2018 we received around 1,700 submissions. We averaged between 1,500 and 1,700 submissions. I think in 2017 we also received closer, a little bit less than 1,800 submissions. For 2018, some of them are still in revision, so I don't have the exact number for that. But for 2017, we pretty much accepted around 30% of all submissions.
Okay. And from some quick math in my head here, that means that you personally are reading about 4 to 5 of these a day. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, roughly at least. And we actually some days are more because so this is over a year, but there are some dead zones. Usually, we have not as many submissions in August. Everybody's on vacation, and in the
Mm.
second half of December for winter holidays. But then, yeah, that's about right. 4 to 5 on average a day. It's about right.
Okay. Now, as we wrap up here, I'd like to talk about the peer review process. And you have dozens of allergists and other medical professionals who volunteer their time to review articles submitted for publication. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the benefits for reviewers, and also how can our listeners who may be interested in reviewing submissions get more involved.
Okay, first of all, I mean, when I want to do make sure on the podcast that I want all our reviewers to know how much appreciative I am of their efforts. We cannot survive without our reviewers. They are our bread and butter. They are our saviors. Actually, I mean, they are what makes JACI great. Because if we don't give the authors a good review, they're not going to come back to us.
Mm.
So I mean, for everybody who's done a review for us, I am indebted to you, and I thank you so very much. So anyway, and I want to make our reviewers happy. So we actually did a reviewer survey last fall as well to make sure that what we're doing good and what we're doing bad. And I'm happy that most of our reviewers were actually happy with the process, but they did have some good suggestions, and we adopted some of the suggestions. One major suggestion, for example, is that when they accept to review now, we're linking it automatically to their Outlook calendar so that they kind of reminds them that a review is due. So I know everybody is busy and they're volunteering their time for us. So I mean, so we're trying to make that easier. We also introduced a flag system so that if they go on the website, the editorial manager where they upload their reviews, green you're good, orange, yellow, we have orange and red, so that kind of helps them out visually. And we actually spent a lot of time, as per their suggestions, to kind of simplify the reviewer template, so it makes it a lot more intuitive, that they don't have to enter as many, they don't have to do as many click buttons, so makes it more or radio buttons to make the process easier for them. So, I mean, why do our reviewers accept to review? First of all, because they're very kind-hearted and they like the specialty and they like the journal. But also, it's I mean, as you know, if it's in your area, you really would like to know what's going on too. And two, we offer them CME for the review. So when they do review for us, it actually counts for CME for towards their board recertification and license renewal as well. And we actually try to always trying to recruit some more reviewers. The more reviewers we have, the better, because we can actually be a little bit more efficient, because we don't want to tax our reviewers, we use the same reviewers over and over again. So if anybody listening, if you think you can review, contact us and we'll kind of talk about how we can do this process. And we actually kind of developed a kind of like a we have the editorial board, obviously, and these are people who are accomplished, and then they feel that they actually so that they we go to them a lot. But we also have something called a reviewer board, which is people who haven't really reviewed that much, but they want to really know how to get into the process. So we can usually kind of have people join the reviewer board, and as they review more for us, and they're doing a good job, then they can become part members of the editorial board. And we're trying to work on a junior reviewer board, people who are just out of fellowship, who want to kind of learn how to review. We also trying to adopt that. And along with our sister journal in practice, we have developed the fellow reviewer program, whereby when we ask a program director to review a manuscript, they can involve one of the fellows with them, and they can actually let us know that the fellow has reviewed that, so that that fellow, as when he or she graduates, becomes part of our junior reviewer boards or our reviewer board. We also have an international reviewer board, as well as international advisory board, again to help us with some of the issues that may be unique to people outside North America.
Just going to ask, you mentioned to contact the journal. Is there an easy way to do that, either through the website, or do you have an email address that people could use?
They can go through the website. Everything goes through the website, because that's actually being checked continually.
Excellent. Okay. And I can tell you, as a reviewer, it is much appreciated, both that you specifically name reviewers and thank them on the pages within JACI annually, and then also at the annual meeting. There's always a nice reception as well. So on behalf of fellow reviewers, thank you for that. It's nice to
Well,
be
thank you.
acknowledged.
As you know, we're very, very appreciative of that.
Yeah. Now, the last question I have for you is, I love that there's a goal of 14 days for reviewer feedback for every submission once the review goes out and is accepted. Why do you like to see such a fast return time, and what type of feedback do you receive
Well, I'm
surrounding
happy
that?
to hear you say that that's fast, because that's not what my authors tell me. So as you know, I mean, again, it's a tightrope. From one point of view, you don't want to tax your reviewer. Obviously, you want to give your reviewer as much time so they can do a really thorough reading and thorough job. I know, but then on the other hand, and again, I'm out soliciting, asking people that you have to think of us before you think of New England Journal. I know that's not going to happen, but I keep saying that. But, and so the one thing that works is that usually if the idea if somebody has something really they think is extremely hot, that they need fast review, then we'd really like to have a fast turnaround. Doesn't always work. Sometimes some of the authors contact me and now they want an expedited review, which means like 14 days is a little bit too fast, too slow. I mean, I
Hmm.
mean, so it's kind of so it's one of those things where you kind of on the one way, no, on the one hand you don't want to overtax your reviewers, but also on the other hand you want to keep the authors happy, because as you know, and as an author myself, I mean, I want to know for sure sooner rather than later, because every submission I submit, I think should get a Nobel Prize, and I think that everybody else thinks that way. So it's kind of being an editor and also having been and is an author myself, I kind of understand, and being a reviewer as well. So we figure 14 days is like a nice kind of compromise. Doesn't always work. I mean, we try to remind some of our reviewers. Now, part of the problem we get why it doesn't always work, because for Jackie, we try to get a minimum of 3 reviewers per original article, sometimes 4 reviewers if we could. And as you know, you don't get them all back at the same time. And sometimes we have to kind of remind some of the reviewers. I'm sure you got some of our reminders when you reviewed for us. And so, and again, with being kind of appreciative of the reviewers' time, it's just also trying to be fair to the authors.
And then the last question I have for you, before I'm happy to take any other comments you have, is do you have a way of knowing exactly when reviewers are going to go on vacation? Because it seems like that's exactly when I get most of my
And that's
invitations.
actually that was exactly that's one of the feedback we got from our reviewers. I know, and we hopefully we have actually fixed the website, the editorial manager where the reviewers are. That should not be an issue anymore. That's what editorial manager people tell me. But also, if you have any problems with that, let us know because we're still tweaking that to kind of get it as indicative of real time as possible. And I'm aware of that actually, and that's part of the feedback we got from the reviewer survey last fall. And I think hopefully we kind of worked on that.
Oh, excellent. That's good to hear. Well, Dr. Ballas, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I truly enjoyed speaking with you and learning more about the journal. Before we depart, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I just first thank you for the opportunity, and I just again when I could mention that this is not a one person job. I mean, this is actually it takes a village to do that. I mean, I've got the deputy editors, the associate editors, the editorial board, and certainly the reviewers. I really want to thank all of them because without them we won't have a product. So I really appreciate that, and I also have to thank our authors because I mean again, I really think it is important for the authors to think that we care about their submissions. And if we reject something, it's not because we don't like you or anything like that. It's just because we have to have a certain cutoff level. And I solicit the authors if they have any issues or suggestions how we can improve, and we will always be happy to listen.
Great. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, David.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode. Please visit www.aaai.org for show notes and any pertinent links from today's conversation. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or Google Play so you can receive new episodes in the future. Thank you again for listening.